Hello, ELIC 30. This is Michael, and we are in How to Be Human, An Autistic Man's Guide to Life by Jory Fleming with Lyric Winnick. And we are continuing in Chapter 6, Language Disconnect. We are currently on page 122 in this second section where Winnick is just about to pose a new question. LW. Why is it good to be of two minds about an idea? Jory. I don't form opinions about language I receive. Each verbal concept has to become compressed into a Jory bead to be translated first before I can understand it. It's not a merger of yourself with either someone else or with an idea that is outside of yourself. When I take ideas and things into my mind, each one is quarantined so that this one idea cannot infect or override other ideas. That separation is often viewed as bad. If you are of two minds about something, people sometimes think of that as duplicitous, or if you hold even two remotely opposing ideas quarantined in your mind like that, people will assume that you're in the middle, or you're not invested in either one or the other, because you haven't picked one to the exclusion of the other. And I respond, maybe for you, but not for me. It's an area that has been the most difficult for me to communicate to others. They are in identical beads, but they are not the same, and I don't necessarily treat them the same. Some may be true or more important. Sometimes I wonder how people can make sense of ideas if they are different in the mind, because then your mind would have to take a defined shape. I asked Jory to give me a list of 10 words that make sense and don't make sense to him. Here is his list with his commentary attached. Words that don't make sense. 1. So. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how the word so is particularly important in human communication. It lets more complex ideas be expressed, or something like that. But it just seems like such a nonsense word in the sense that it's not relevant. If it was removed, I would have no trouble following a logical argument. 2. Words that are onomatopoeia. Words that are supposed to be like sounds. I don't understand those. Why wouldn't you just do the sound? 3. Idioms such as cold feet or raining cats and dogs. 4. Swear words, because I would rather have somebody competently express their displeasure using a greater vocabulary. And I think asking me for 10 examples is a high number. Words that make sense. 1. Ramble. I tend to like words that are descriptive in the sense that they are really simplistic in relating to specific things. Ramble really just means walking, but it fosters an image for you. It fosters an image for you. I like words like that because It's a little bit easier to make the translation process to images if the word is given an image already. Descriptive words connect right to an image. 2. Pillow. I like the word pillow because a lot of the letters are kind of poofy, like O's and W and P. They all slightly resemble a pillow, which I find somewhat amusing. 3. Trill. Even though I don't like onomatopoeia, I do like some words that describe sounds, like trill, which is often used to describe bird calls. It's a strange word, but it does tell you something. 4. Every so often, I'll see a word that's unusual where its meaning is hyper-specific. There's a website I like, and one time the author built a kind of typewriter program that would limit you to write with the top 1,000 most used English words. The list had words like as, is, such, he, hot, for, that, one, be. It was surprisingly difficult to write anything, but at the same time, you could write out some really complex stuff if you thought about it. It made me realize that a large number of words on that top 1,000 list are words I do not like and do not understand. And I think because they're used so frequently, the context in which they are used also shifts frequently, and it's hard to pin any of them down. Versus rare words, which are like a spice in the kitchen, which is only used in a couple of your recipes, but it makes those recipes really fantastic. Most of the words are like that thing you eat every day and you're tired of. 5. Brook. It's hyper-specific because a brook is not a stream and it's not a river, and so forth. Forms of storytelling. Maps and charts versus words. Personally, I think charts and maps can be much better at telling a story than people are in some ways. People make the maps, but it takes less words. You make a nice map and you show it to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's good. Then you know you've improved somebody's understanding. And it's their own understanding because they used their own parts of their brain to unlock that. You don't have to force it into them. LW. Have you ever tried to learn another language like French or Spanish? Jory. I took Spanish in high school, and then the University of South Carolina had a language requirement, so I took 2 semesters of college-level Spanish as well, but I can't speak Spanish. I think it would be nice to learn another language. In terms of how challenging it is, it's about the same for me with any language. I had one conversation with a student sitting next to me in a Spanish class. They were saying how hard it is because the voice in your head is English, so it's hard to speak Spanish. That was not a problem for me because I had neither Spanish nor English going on in my head. But for me, speaking was just as challenging as it was for them. The one thing I gained from Spanish is that I can sort of read it if it's not too complicated, especially signs. I can sort of deduce what the Spanish might mean. Even with English, I thought it would be worse when I came to the UK. I thought, this is going to be terrible because they speak British. But it actually turned out to be pretty good because I struggle with both US and UK English. Jory often experiences the assumption that two autistic people must be on the same wavelength and have an easier time communicating. In fact, he has found it to be the opposite, and he explains why, to him, two autistic people aren't necessarily great communicators with each other. LW, do you ever feel as if you have a better connection or a better rapport more quickly with someone else who is autistic? Jory, if anything, it's probably harder because language is the means of communication, not telepathy. If you're trying to connect with another person using the bridge of language, then when you talk with a non-autistic person, you can easily expect one half of the bridge to operate the way the default is set. But heaven forbid if both sides of the bridge are expecting the other side to be operating on the default state, and instead it's somebody else on the spectrum. Then both sides of the bridge have problems rather than simply one side. I've definitely found it more challenging to communicate with another person on the spectrum in most cases because we are both struggling. However, in many cases, it usually works out fine because nobody is making assumptions and using specific language. There's also usually much less small talk. Books are a different experience than conversation for Jory. As he puts it, when I read a book, it doesn't drain me in the same way as a conversation. Jory, I remember one book, A Child's History of the World, that used very simple language, which was very helpful, obviously. It was a story that was being told, and language was the only medium that the author had available. I think it is a subtle but very important distinction. Up until that point, I could understand things that Mom was talking about, but I didn't see the connection between knowledge and books. But this book was very clearly and intentionally written, so you were just experiencing the story because of how simply it was written. There was a lot there, but it was not hard to gain access to, which was particularly important for me because I hadn't reached a point where maybe I could interpret a more traditional history textbook or something like that very well. Reading it, I got the idea that facts, when put together with other facts, can be really, really interesting. After that, I must have subconsciously decided to acquire loads of facts, like data points. And that has stuck with me, the desire to know more things. The more I learn about things, the more I discover what I don't know, which is infuriating. But the process of increasing your knowledge is something I like. After I read that book, it was sort of turning on a switch that has stayed on. I had more motivation to do the harder stuff and seek out more language. LW. Book versus conversation. Which do you prefer? Jury. That's too simplistic. If it's a good book versus like a conversation about the weather, I'll 100% like the book. But if we're talking about something interesting, then I might prefer that to a book, because a book can be one-sided and not dynamic. Writers can sometimes be so obsessed with the genius of their own ideas that it kind of comes off the wrong way. If it's the kind of conversation where something interesting and unexpected happens, it's awesome. But if that's not the type of conversation, then I'd prefer a book. There are plenty of books where you don't feel the presence of the writer. You feel the story, especially those books that transport you to another place, whether that's an idea or whether it's more for fun, like sci-fi or a mystery. That element doesn't occur very often in conversations. I can never quote movies or books like some people can. But if I've read something and paid attention to it and enjoyed it, then I can give you a full description. Although oftentimes I'll ignore large chunks of the author's description of the characters and the places and things like that. Movies are always a surprise to me if I've read the book. I do a lot more imagining in my own head about what something looks like and rely less on the author's words that they've worked so hard to stick in there about somebody's appearance. And we'll stop there for this video.